My name is Barkan, and we will talk about Steam Early Access, how to make the most out of it, and what risks we should be aware of. A few words about myself. I'm the founder of Suncrash. We created a Judgment Apocalypse Survival Simulation. Sorry for the long name. We've been on Steam for half a year now. We're getting very positive reviews. Sales are adequate, and we plan to release the full version of the game around February, March. No promises. What we'll talk about today, first we'll define what Steam Early Access is, what it's not, the positives, the benefits, and the risks that we take when we do early access, how to determine whether early access is the right thing for our team, when to release to the program, when a game is ready for it, how to behave during the early access phase, and how to finish the early access, how to release the full release. So what is Steam Early Access? It's a public alpha program. It is not a crowdfunding program. There's a very big difference because in crowdfunding, people play to support your idea. In early access, people pay to play the game. So the players buy the game, they expect to be a fun game, an enjoyable game right away. And this is important for the rest of the conversation. The benefits of early access, first and foremost, at least for me, is getting feedback and improving the game. Thanks to the early access program, you can have a better final product because you get so many people playing your game on Steam, you get so much feedback, so much data that you can use to improve your game. And this is, for me at least, it's the main benefit of the program. If you had released right away, then you would have lost all that opportunity to learn and improve your game. Another one is testing the waters. Sometimes you're not sure how, like you have hundreds of ideas for your projects, you want to work on it for 5 years and add all the features that you ever dreamed of, but you're not sure it's worth the effort and the budget that will take you to develop all that. Early access is a good way to determine how popular your game is, how much market demand is for it. So you can release your game, and depending on how well it's received, decide if you're going to develop all your dream features or just the basics and finish it according to the original plan. Second thing is more exposure on Steam, and emphasis on Steam, because the press will behave differently, and we'll talk about that later. But on Steam, you get 2 releases. You release it once on early access, and you get a lot of visibility from Steam when you release a game, and then you get another one when you release the final version of the game. A lot of people will be seeing your game page, and you will probably sell more during the launch, the first one, early access, and the second one, the final release, than you will other times. Funding. So this one has an asterisk on it, because while early access is a great game, it's a great way to get some funding before your game is finished, it's also risky, because you might not be able to sell in early access as well as you thought. But you already sold the game to people, and people are expecting a finished product. So you might have to finish the game without the budget. So it's better to look at the budget as a bonus. As if you are selling well, then you have a way to continue developing the game for years or for a longer time. But if you don't sell well, you still have to be able to finish the game. Don't release on early access without being able to finish the game, even without sales. The negative impact that early access could have, some of the drawbacks. The first one is a weaker final launch. So we talked about more visibility in Steam because you have 2 launches, but the overall final launch is a bit weaker because the press and influencers and even the players, they've already seen the game, they've already played it for months and months. So suddenly when you release, it's not like very dramatic, it's not something new and exciting. And I did put question marks there because it's not always true. Your game might have been unknown, and thanks to the early access, it's now more popular. So you might have an even better final release. There are a lot of opinions about this, but for sure, it's not as exciting when you release a game that people have already played as much as when you release a new game. Less flexibility. This is a big one. Once your game is out there on early access, people have expectations from you. You have commitments. You need to release updates every few months. You need to, you cannot delete old save games. You cannot remove features that people like. Players can get mad, and mad players leave negative reviews. You may lose key players because the players that love the game the most, that are most enthusiastic about it, they will buy the game right away. And then half a year later, when you do more and more updates, they might get bored of it, they might get tired of it, and move on to other games. And these players, the ones that love the game most, they are exactly the people that you need spreading the word when you release. And you may lose them. And this is a very big one, because reviews during early access, they will remain with you in the final launch of the game. And you're releasing a game that you're not completely happy with. I mean, you yourself think it's not finished. Otherwise, you would have released it as a final release and not early access. But people will judge it, and people will leave reviews, and those will stay with you. So most of the negative impact we can get from early access ends with negative reviews that will stay with you and harm your sales later on. So how to determine whether the program is right for your team? First of all, the game itself. Is it a good fit or not? For example, games with high replayability, with random generated content, they tend to be better fits because a player plays once when he buys the game, and then when you update the game, it's more likely that he'll play again because the game is planned to be replayable. On the other hand, if you look at story-based games, once the player has played the game, he knows the story, he knows the punchline, he knows the ending. He might be less inclined to play after you update and add new mechanics or add a new branching story. So it's a bit harder to get people to play over and over again when it's a story-based game. Multiplayer also. Sometimes you need a very strong launch because you want there to be a lot of players that can play the game. And when you launch early access, it could be spread on a longer time period. And then every given time, you might have less players. On the other hand, if you have a successful early access, your final release, you will have already a very large community. So this is something to consider. And another very, very important point is always research similar games. Look at games that are similar to yours. How are they doing in early access? Are they successful? What are people saying about them? This could help you determine whether your game is a good fit or not. We talked about this before. Don't depend on the sales from early access. It can be a nice bonus, but if you can't finish the game without sales, early access might not be the best thing for you. Because once you release a game on early access, you promise the players to provide them a finished, a working game. And if you later release a game that it's not working or you abandon your game, you will harm your reputation, you will harm the entire early access program for all indies. And always consider alternatives. Maybe a private alpha program is better for you. What other alternatives do you have? Maybe launch on itch.io and wait with Steam for later on. This is an example from Steam Spy, the most common games on early access. So some games are better fits, other are less. Next, this is probably the most important slide, is when to determine whether the game is ready for early access. Because if you launch too early, you will get very negative reviews. And that will stay with you forever. So first of all, again, research similar games. Look at why similar games are getting negative reviews. Why are they getting positive reviews? How is your game compared to them? Does it have the same issues that people are complaining about? Does it have the same advantages that people like? This is a great way to tell whether you're ready or not. A game has to launch when it's already fun to play, it's already enjoyable. People are buying to play the game, to enjoy it, not to support some idea that maybe one day the game will be fun. This is not crowdfunding, and they will judge you according to how fun the game is on release day. So make sure it's already fun. Don't plan on updating and making it fun later. And it has to be stable enough. If a little bit bugs are acceptable in early access most of the time, but if there are so many issues that the game becomes unplayable and not fun, people will get mad. Trends and the usual release considerations, like releasing during the holidays when all the AAAs are released, you will get drowned with all the big titles and nobody will pay attention to you. This is also true for early access. It's still a launch, you still want to make a lot of noise, you still want press, so all the regular considerations. During early access, listen and show it. Listen to your community. The best way to show it that you're listening to them is just by implementing on updates what they're asking for. If everyone is complaining about some UI quirk that you thought is the best way, but suddenly everyone can't handle it, then fix it. And when they see that you're fixing stuff that they're complaining about, they know that you're listening to them. Communicate with them and try to engage. Not just updating what you're doing, but also ask questions. Try to get them to be active, an active community. An active community is more likely to stay interested for longer periods of time and to help you spread the word when you need it. Don't make promises. This is important. Try to make as little promises as possible. It's very enticing to promise people everything that you imagine for your game so they can buy it now and you can get more money and finish the game the way you want it to. But people will hold you to your promises. You're already losing a lot of flexibility when you release the game in early access. You are now more constrained. Try to not constrain yourself even more by making promises. When the time is right, show them. Don't promise everything in advance. Analytics are always important, but even more so here, because one of the main benefits in early access is to improve the game. And you can't improve the game without data. Analytics, try to have them before you launch. And frequent updates. People will expect the updates. You will get negative reviews if you seem to abandon the game and don't update frequently. But on the other hand, too frequently is small updates and it becomes too common, not interesting news because it happens too much. We found that the best timeline is like an update once every 2 months or 2. Be honest, be open. Let the community know what you're doing. Let them know what your plans are in the very, very near future. Don't make promises. They appreciate honesty. They appreciate openness. It'll help you. Now, the final release, first of all, only when you're ready. Don't release because you're tired of early access or because you feel that not enough people are playing the game and you want more players. When you release from early access, people have more expectations than if it's just released directly to the finished version. Because you've had a chance to have players play your game, you've had a chance to receive feedback. Players expect you to listen to them, to feel the feedback, and not release a broken game. So make sure that you release when the game is ready to be final release. Have enough content and not too many bugs. And try to release with a bang. Because we talked about the press not being interested in games that released after early access because they've already seen it, players have already played it. But you can change that. You can release something new that's only there in the final release. A great example for this is Prison Architect. They had a very successful early access program, and then in their final release, they added a whole new game mode, which was Prison Escape. Instead of building a prison, they added a mode where you have to escape from prison. And that went really well. Everyone was excited of it as if it was a new game. This is 3 things I'd recommend everyone to see if you're planning any early access program. There's a Steam Spy article with a lot of interesting numbers. There's a Gamma Sutra article about successful early access games, and a Steam Dev Days video from 2014 about early access. So the question was, what is the incentive for the players to buy games when they're still in early access? There are a lot of different incentives. Some players want to get their hands on the game as soon as possible because they really love the idea and want to try it out. Others like to be involved in the development, give their feedback. They feel special when they're involved in it, and I'm sure there are other reasons, like I don't know, just players that consider early access game, especially if the reviews are good. It's just a game. Yeah, sure, we'll play it now, and maybe then again we'll play it in a year when it's released in the final release. But we want to play it, and it's available, and it's getting good reviews. Pricing for early access is when you fill in your early access forms and you have a place where Steam asks you, what are your plans for pricing after the early access? Most of the examples I've seen, the price remains the same, but you do have an option to say, if you buy it now in early access, it's going to be cheaper. And then when the final release, it will be higher. There's also the other way around. You can say, right now, we only want the players that really want this game. If you don't really want it, buy it later when it's finished. We only want the most enthused players to help us now, so they're going to have to pay more. And that's very common in Kickstarter. In Kickstarter, you have the higher tier to get alpha access, and the lower tier that costs less to get only the final release access. So there's prestige in being early access, in being the first one to play the game. Okay, thank you, everyone.